Yeah, good day and happy Saturday. Good afternoon to everybody, except possibly the gangs for spreading COVID and putting Northland into lockdown, just like Waikato, an increasing area of the North Island. We want to talk today, though, about immigration. We have Dr. James McDowall, our immigration spokesperson, somebody who has previously been involved in running an immigration law firm with his wife. He's probably the most multi-talented person in Parliament, playing the piano, singing. Can't remember if he dances, speaks about 4 languages, and he got a PhD by the time he was 30. He's also a registered pistol shooter with the Hamilton Club and was very instrumental in putting together ACT's firearm policy last year. So there's quite a few strings to his bow, or bullets to his gun, I guess you'd say. So we're very grateful to have James on, but here to talk about immigration policy. James, tell us just run it up the mast. What happened last week? And then we'll get a bit into who's excluded and maybe why it was necessary, if they can deliver it, and what are the wider ramifications for New Zealand immigration policy.
Yeah, thanks, David. So what happened last week was something that we kind of saw coming. We have pressed the minister on this issue of the growing backlogs and the EOIs. The numbers were more than 11,000, and we just were saying over and over again that the way these things are processed.
So just come on. You've only been in Wellington and Parliament for a year. You're falling into the trap. What's an EOI? Just for the good people who aren't ensconced in this every day like you.
Indeed. So if you want residency in New Zealand, so it means you want to stay here, you've got to do an expression of interest first. And since March 2020, those have been totally frozen. So there's been no real simple pathway to residency. And so that's just grown because you could still apply for one. They're just not going anywhere.
This is completely nuts. So is it a little bit like when you go to the fish and chip shop and they're supposed to close at 7 and it's 6 o'clock and they say, oh, we're not taking any more orders, we're full?
Yeah, basically the announcements big announcements always done online. Yeah.
So I mean, let's just tease this out a bit, because like the immigration department is all about giving people the paperwork to come through the border, and no one ever imagined that the government would shut the borders to New Zealand for 18 months. So surely that would be a really good opportunity for them to catch up on any backlog and, actually start putting in place better systems so they didn't get another backlog. So how did they get so far behind, and what have they been doing?
Well, you'd think it would be a good opportunity, wouldn't you? The delays just got worse. They went up to 27 months for residency. And how could things get stalled when they're not actually selecting EOIs? So they really just exposed a whole lot of faults in the system. It started before COVID, but COVID made it worse because for residency, everything's on paper, and they basically examine these applications to the 3rd degree. They take absolutely forever. And what's happened last week is a total, as we say, reset of the immigration reset, where they finally admitted that actually they can't do things according to the status quo. They can't process all of these applications, so they're doing something bold. So
that's a really good place to just as another little diversion, the reset of the reset. Now, hang on. So when I'm sorry, there's so many steps here. If you haven't been following immigration policy lately, it's one of the craziest things that happened. So what was the reset, and why did the reset need to be reset?
Yeah, well, the reset was supposed to be about how, long-term in New Zealand, the minister wanted to say, look, businesses should not rely on migrants to fill skills gaps. We should be training local people. Perfectly admirable goal, but a little bit unrealistic in the short to medium term. And certainly businesses were crying out, going, look, we can't actually find people. And I think if I add to that, the admission of defeat, I think, comes from where you look at the scarce list of this new residency visa, and that gives you a category that you can qualify under. And you look at the different professions and you just go, well, hang on a minute, like surely you can find people in New Zealand that can do these roles. But now the minister's come out and said, we can't fill this. You guys get residency very quickly. And a great example, and I'm not making this up. This is Immigration New Zealand terminology. If you're a cotton grower, we have that. If you're a cotton grower, you qualify under this new residency, even if you haven't been in New Zealand very long and you've been paid minimum wage. You get residency under this.
Okay, so I trust you're not making it up, but
No.
I should probably, I feel a bit guilty. I wish we had Mark Cameron, our primary industry spokesperson, here, because being the MP for Epsom, we don't do a lot of cotton growing in Epsom. Are you aware? Is there a cotton industry in New Zealand?
Oh, there is. I wasn't aware of a shortage in that exact role, but I mean, there's others too, right? If you're a florist, so the florist is included on the scarce list. And if you just go onto immigration's website, you can see the full list, and it's pretty astonishing. And one of the, if we talk about people who got left out, and this is a really important topic. So if you are, maybe you're someone who's been in New Zealand for 8 years or so, you're earning over $27 an hour, the median wage. You've held work visas previously, but then because you wanted residency one day, you've decided to go and study. So you're still working, but you go and get a student visa. If you did that, you don't qualify, because student visa holders don't qualify under this new scheme. So you're dedicated to New Zealand, you pay tons of tax, you've been here for ages, you decided to upskill, get a master's or a PhD, you're out of luck. But if you're a cotton grower, you've been here for 3 months and you get paid minimum wage, qualify. So figure that out.
Sorry, I just checked out. I've just been Googling New Zealand cotton farm, and I'm not convinced that there is a New Zealand cotton growing industry. But if anyone wants to pitch in the comments, I just would have thought it would have been too cold to grow cotton. But what would I know? I'm just a simple electrical engineer and politician. All right, so altogether, the government has done the right thing, but in doing so admitted that what it was doing before didn't work. So before it said you've got to have all these really specific, crazy specifications to get residency. You have to be a cotton grower, for example, even though we're not sure at this point. We can't confirm if there is a cotton industry, but
that's a new requirement, a new category. But yeah.
There's certainly speculation that there may be a cotton industry in New Zealand, and people are potentially able to come for that. And then they said, look, we're going to get rid of all that. 165,000 people have a pathway to residency. So I guess in a way they admitted what they were doing before wasn't working, and perhaps we should welcome that, because I know as a local MP how much the shortage of skilled people is affecting business, and people think that immigrants are going to come and take your job. Actually, it's just not true. I've never met an employer that would employ an immigrant before someone who already has their papers. Why would you go through the rigmarole if you didn't have to? But someone coming to immigrate can mean that your business has a better set of skills and is able to grow and expand and compete globally. It might actually secure your job or create more jobs. So we're in favor of this. We don't think that people coming takes away jobs, but there are other issues, such as, well, what happens when someone's asked in the question, this is a great question, whoever asked this, where do they plan, I love a bit of sarcasm on a Saturday afternoon, where do they plan on housing 160,000 plus people in one of the 7 Kiwi build houses they built last month? Potentially. I mean, at least they built 7, and we got to, at this stage, we've got to give the government credit for everything, because it's pretty hard to do. But I mean, this is an issue, and I know Brooke, our housing spokesperson and deputy, she's been asking about this, saying what preparations have they made? Are you aware that they even factored in what opening the borders will do to the housing market?
Well, it came as a bit of a shock revelation to Summit Immigration New Zealand. So I suspect, despite being under the same, in the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, there hasn't been a great deal of discussion about this. But, the reality is there will be, over 12 months, a staggered approach. There will be perhaps 100,000 people who are now able to purchase a home. In terms of, and that should be the question around that. In terms of where they plan on housing them, keep in mind these people are already in New Zealand in houses renting, but it certainly will create a pressure on the housing market. Has the government done a good enough job to prepare for this?
That's a really good point. So, I mean, this is not about new people coming into New Zealand. In fact, actually, people that are currently outside New Zealand don't qualify, but
Indeed.
People who have money will now be legally able to buy homes. They might decide to. And I doubt that they've thought about it, but I suspect that the housing market, in spite of rising interest rates, will now have another little bump, because, again, the government hasn't thought through coordinating these things. But hey, what can we do? Hey, just going back to, I think you mentioned people who maybe should have been eligible for this new residency pathway but aren't. Can you talk more about those people?
Yeah, I mean, students is a big one. Those are student visas, and whether or not they've, held a work visa previously or not. There's also, a category of people who are partners of students, and those partners have a work visa based on their partnership. So that's an interesting way of, the immigration's dealt with that. So they don't qualify. And there's a lot of very highly skilled people, particularly if they're doing, late study and that sort of thing, that actually want to retain here. And some people have, in fact, been on these temporary visas for a very long time, and often through no fault of their own. So we've.
I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but this whole world is so crazy. So you just said people have been on temporary visas for a very long time. How do you get on a temporary visa for a long time? I mean, there seem to be, even the language of this field doesn't really stack up.
Yeah, indeed. They just keep renewing visas and changing jobs and or going back and forth from being a student, and you actually never get residency. And there'll be a myriad of reasons, different reasons why people have ended up in that situation. But if they didn't have a work visa, specifically included work visa on the 29th of September 2021, and meet the other requirements, then you're out of luck.
Yeah, so just to recap, basically people who decided, look, I'm going to cool my heels and study in New Zealand, they might have given up a work visa to go back and reskill themselves and maybe paid for the education. They're excluded, and I think that's nuts. And secondly, there's people who have given up and basically gone home, waiting for the New Zealand government to do something because they're not currently on New Zealand soil. They can't get back in because who could with MIQ, not foreign citizens anyway. So those people have lost. But talk about what this means for New Zealand's reputation, because it seems to me that even if you're against immigration, you should want New Zealand to be attracting, the most skilled, the best people possible. So I've seen Canada openly advertising on New Zealand news websites saying, "Screw those guys, come here." Basically, what is from the people you're talking to? What's happened to New Zealand's reputation as a global destination lately?
There's been huge damage, and New Zealand is still, unlike Canada and Australia and others, this whole visa thing that's come out is not about attracting people to New Zealand from overseas. It's to deal with the problems that have been created here in New Zealand by Immigration New Zealand. So for the international reputation point of view, they haven't solved anything. They've just admitted that things have been a bit rubbish here. And so, long term, it's going to be about, okay, now that the minister's trying to clear the decks with this move, what is he going to do to the skilled migrant category? That's the next big question. And because that's the flagship residency category in New Zealand. So what are the settings going to be? We know it's going to be harder. Well, we know they're going to muck around with points, or they may change the whole structure. And ultimately, that's why the minister has done this move, because he just can't actually reform the skilled migrant category with such huge queues sitting in it doing nothing. So, reputation has been damaged based on the feedback I've received.
Yeah. And just thinking back to, you've been doing a great job as an opposition MP on this, and I know others have got a lot of credit, but I think you've been working just as hard, if not harder. So on the day they announced this, you were up in Parliament asking a question. The question was, will you actually process these in time? And how did old Minister Farfoy come back on that?
Yeah, he said, no worries, easy peasy. And when I questioned him on the what does that actually mean within 12 months? What are we talking about here? And he said 80%. So, okay, that's a bit different to processing them all in 12 months, but never mind. But if we look at that, we say, okay, 80% of 165,000 people. So it's about 110,000 applications, but about 165,000 people in 12 months. You're talking about 350 applications per day. And Immigration New Zealand has never before seen anything like that in terms of those numbers. It takes ages traditionally to get a residency application processed. And so they're saying, the Minister, Chris Farfoy, said, it's an online form now. There's simple criteria. And then everybody says, yeah, okay, how are you going to prove? What about partnership? How do you prove that? What about health and character? The questions around that. And then basically it's, there could be all of these complexities as well. So can they do 350 in a day without quadrupling their staff? I'm not too sure about that.
That's such a great insight. Okay, so they're basically saying 80% of 110,000 principal applicants. So that's 88,000 applications they're going to do, and you're saying that's 350 a day. And I trust your maths on that.
350 based on 165,000 people.
Okay.
Yeah,
but you're counting on them working weekends. I mean, do you know any civil servants or bureaucrats that work weekends?
That's true. But if we just take principal applications, you're talking about 270 a day or something like that, maybe a little bit less.
Including the weekend.
Including the weekends. I'm being a bit
week.
So we'll just call it 300.
I've been in Wellington on the weekend. There's nobody at work, I can tell. Just us, actually. All right. All right. So basically, the question is, how is it credible that the immigration department is going to work faster than ever before when they already had a backlog so great they had to stop taking applications? And is there anything credible they've done that might help with that?
Well, what they're doing is they're rolling out this new process, this tool. They've got this new tool for processing applications, and they're going to test drive it first with visitor visas and student visas. And I think, okay, that's fine, that's good. But the application's open on the 1st of December in theory for the priority of this new residency visa. So they're going to basically have a month to test a new tool. And I hope it works well, because if it doesn't, then they kind of run themselves out of time yet again. So
just so I understand this, that this government's been in place 4 years. They got such a big backlog, even with the border closed, they had to stop taking applications. They've now announced they're going to let 165,000 people become residents, 80% of them within a year, and they're currently testing the new software. When you say a tool, the new software, to see if it'll work, and they've basically got 8 weeks to make it work.
Yeah, well, they haven't started using it yet, and I know the INZ staff have been talking to them, and they're getting some details on it, so it'll be coming shortly. But they're kind of winging it.
Oh dear. Okay. Well, I'm so glad that you're all over the details of this. Every time I talk to you about immigration, I learn new things that are totally crazy. So we need to make you the Minister for Immigration. So just talk a little bit about, what you do, because ultimately it's fun to, well, sort of, I guess in a way, amusing to talk about how bad this government is. But, what would we do as a bit of hope? How would you sort it?
Yeah, look, I mean, the big issues at the moment, you've got things, I mean, paper-based applications are just totally stupid. But really our immigration system has just gotten so complicated. And the sheer number of visas and the different types of conditions, we just need to streamline it and simplify it. And the minister has basically admitted this by doing this new residency visa, because he's captured so many people. So there would have to be a revisit of the structure of how we do our visas, what those visas are, and getting rid of these ANSCO code things, these sort of industry skills things, just overcomplicating the visa process. So really, you've got to start there. Needs an overhaul.
Yeah, no, well, I couldn't agree more. And so we've really got to go back to the original question of why do we have immigration? Why do we have an immigration department? What do they need to do, and how could they do it more easily? And I guess if you start with those questions, you might find that most of the stuff that they've got could easily just be dumped.
Yep, indeed. Yep, and they need to recognise the benefits that migrants bring to New Zealand, how to evaluate those skills and appreciate them, and certainly listen to businesses and employers properly, because they haven't been doing that.
Yeah. So then, when you paint the big picture, I mean, what is the purpose of immigration, and how would you describe exposition on it from the point of view of people who are already here?
Yeah, it's absolutely valuable in growing our economy and growing business and creating jobs. And New Zealand is never going to thrive on the global stage if we just become a hermit kingdom of little to no immigration. And that's basically what our border settings have been since April 2020. And we're seeing those effects, these huge skill shortages. And in the meantime, the minister has been treating those migrants here like rubbish, frankly. And those offshore as well, can't forget about them. Those that, through no fault of their own, they're on a work visa, a skilled job, they've got a house here, they rent here, they've got their belongings here, they've got the car parked on the side of the road, and they went on a short trip overseas to see family, and they haven't been back since, and they're still paying rent. Just
totally nuts, and we've certainly advocated that private MIQ and eventually getting rid of MIQ and letting people actually come into New Zealand. We've had a question here: what is stopping double vaccinated persons from returning to New Zealand? From Marcus. And Marcus, that is a great question. I think the issue right now is that New Zealand's overall vaccination rate is still very low because for some reason our government spent the first half of the year celebrating that we were letting the rest of the world do it first. And I think we're at present, the question is, if there was a major outbreak, what would happen to ICU capacity? And I think there's some evidence that in many parts of New Zealand, it'd be overwhelmed, and we would have doctors making triage decisions New Zealanders just aren't used to seeing, where they'd have to say, you're probably going to make it, you get a ventilator, you probably won't, so you just go home and die. And New Zealanders just aren't ready for that. My criticism of the government is that it has not put in place a clearly signposted plan to say this is how we're going to get our freedom back. Instead, they're just making it up from day to day. It's just extraordinary. One day, the minister goes on the radio and says, elimination's still possible, we'll get to zero. The next day goes on the radio, says elimination's dead. It's quite extraordinary, really, the times we're living in. And the danger of it is the government is losing people's confidence as a result, all of which is very much the case with this Northland COVID case, where they're just stonewalling. You might have seen last night the ministers were asked, or do you know if the person's a criminal, got criminal convictions? Nope. Do you know if they're associated with a gang? Nope. Do you know what sort of work they do? Nope. Do you know why they were given any kind of travel permit to leave Auckland and go to Northland in the first place? Nope. The minister pretends they don't know anything about this case, but he knows enough to lock down a whole province. It's just not credible. Anyway, we're just getting on a bit of an angle there with the COVID response, but they're certainly losing confidence there. And one of the outcomes is that we can't let double vax people leave New Zealand because the government has no plan to do that. ACT does have such a plan, and that's our COVID 3.0 plan, where we say on December 1st, that's our Freedom Day. We're opening up from there. We're going to let people enter New Zealand. If you want to come back, if you're double vaxxed, if you do a negative test at day -3, a negative test before you fly, a negative test when you land, and a negative test 3 days after you arrive and isolate in your house, then you're free. And if we were to do that, we'd have almost no COVID entering New Zealand through the border, but thousands of people would be able to enter the border, and that's becoming more and more vital. The government can't tell you when it's going to do that. They're just saying, well, we don't know what will happen next week or even tomorrow. So we need certainty there. Anyway, probably a bit more of an answer than you're expecting there. Whoever asked that question, I think it was Marcus, but I certainly hope that any relatives you have are able to come back soon. I got another question here. It doesn't say who from on my screen, but what is your population policy for New Zealand, David Seymour, i.e. max 7 million, 10 million, or even more? So I think this is a really important question that a lot of people ask, and a lot of people want the government to set out such a plan. I would argue that while I understand the desire for it, I don't think it's a possible thing the government can do or necessary. And let me just go through that. I don't think it's possible because the government today has very little idea what's going to happen next week, let alone in 20 or 30 years' time. So if you tried to set New Zealand's population in, say, 1980, you would have had no idea that the internet was going to totally revolutionize the world economy, and a whole range of jobs that get done in New Zealand now would suddenly exist and would actually be jobs that were quite advantageous for New Zealand. You take the whole film industry, you look at Xero, the software company. Whoever thought that New Zealanders could do Americans' accounting for them? Well, that's basically what they're doing, but they've created software for Americans to use, and they're doing exceedingly well at it. And I suspect in another 30 years' time, there will be things that we can't even imagine now that will become major industries in New Zealand. And we'll say, well, it's a pity that all of that stuff exists overseas because we didn't let more people in because we thought the population should only be 6 million or whatever. So I think it would be, first of all, a mistake to try and pick a population for New Zealand. The government just doesn't know enough about the present, let alone the future. But the second reason that I wouldn't support it is I don't think it's necessary to set a population target. If you think about it, people are worried about specific issues: overcrowding of schools and hospitals, extra stress on infrastructure, not enough homes being built. These are the kinds of issues that people are worried about. And I think the other one is, maintaining New Zealand's culture as a liberal democracy. But if those are the things you're worried about, instead of trying to set the population, let's worry about those things and tackle them head on. We definitely need better policy around infrastructure. We definitely have a big problem with our health and education as well as housing. But those policy areas, we're going to have big problems in all those areas, regardless of what happens in immigration. Some people say, well, immigration make it worse. Well, not if we get that stuff right. So if you look at through ACT's policies, we're in favour of having 30-year partnerships between central government and local government to get infrastructure planned and funded and built. At the moment, it's such a disaster. Central government has the money, local government does the planning. When central government wants to build something, they often find local government hasn't planned it. When local government wants to plan something, often they find central government refuses to fund it. It's amazing we get anything built in New Zealand, actually. So ACT has a plan to get infrastructure planned and funded. If you solve that problem, most of the concerns about immigration putting pressure on resources goes away. And we could have similar arguments in education and health, for example. We also say that if you want to come to New Zealand, you should sign up to the values of liberal democracy. Men and women are equal. We don't judge people on their religion, sexuality. We believe in free speech. And we believe that liberal democracy is the best way to run a country. So if you start with those basic assumptions, then you're in a really good place. We're in favour of fixing a whole bunch of issues with New Zealand. But we're not in favour of trying to pick a number because most governments don't know what that number should be anyway. We've got a few more questions here. There's possibly one here for James. Love Purple, I don't know if it's a real name, but Love Purple says people are being misled by INZ, switch from work visa to student visa, then being left out from this Section 61. What a joke. Just following the direction of what INZ wants. So I think James, you've answered that. Is people have been left in limbo, and they should be included, right?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure the Section 61 reference, but I'd say in general, the idea of being misled by INZ, this is a bit of a sore point for a lot of student visa holders, because the minister turned around and said, I'm not going to expand the eligibility to student visa holders because that's just for temporary purpose. That's for short-term stays in New Zealand. It's not a pathway to residency. But actually, very clearly, for many years, the message from Immigration New Zealand in letters and communications, emails, etc., has been that this is a pathway to residency. That has been communicated very clearly. So that does feel like a bit of a betrayal there to say to students, and the reason they said that is so that you get more points for the skilled migrant category. Totally
I've got a comment here from Ismart, which I think really sums up how a lot of people I hear from are feeling. They say, New Zealand advertises, come to New Zealand, study and get a clear pathway towards residency. When we come, give away our money. They then say we're nobody. We feel cheated. Is that about what you're hearing, James?
It's exactly what I was saying just then, is that this has been the message from the government. Come to study in New Zealand, get a world-class education, pay your international student fees, which cost a fortune, by the way, and then you're on your pathway to residency. But now the minister turns around and says, that's just temporary. That's got nothing to do with residency. So he's totally misled them.
Yeah, hey, here's another one, and this will probably be our last, because we're right up against 2:30, but Adam says, where do you guys stand on the living together policy for partnership visas? Are you on side with getting it abolished? So just for a bit of background, I get this as a local MP. People come to me and say, look, my partner lives in another country. I want to bring them to New Zealand. We are married. But in our culture, You don't live with people before you get married. You guys in the Western world, you guys are really the only people that do that, actually. It's quite unusual everywhere else. However, New Zealand immigration will not recognise our relationship because we don't live together. James, this is a very difficult area because on the one hand, you've got to have a way of seeing that relationships are genuine. Otherwise, every person that immigrated could bring an extra person for free. But it seems that culturally, INZ is totally unprepared to recognise relationships as they genuinely exist in the rest of the world. So what's your take on this?
Yep, it's a controversial topic, a difficult topic, and one of the issues is culturally arranged marriages and the fact that you don't live together, as you highlighted. Another issue is COVID has simply forced people to not be able to live with each other. So that's, with borders closed, it hasn't been very fair. And the other thing is for those, is a lot of people here that are in genuine relationships, they might have slightly different circumstances with the way they live, etc. There's all sorts of different things, and it constantly results in appeals and reconsiderations to INZ, and there's just so much red tape. I'm generally speaking in favour of getting rid of it, but with the caveat that we need to figure out a way to establish that relationships are genuine. So the 12-month rule, I have a problem with that, but we've got to make sure we still don't open up for immigration fraud as well. So there's a balance there, but certainly the status quo is not very fair.
Yeah. No, well done. I think that is the sensible position, is that we need to find a balance between a totally sort of Western straitjacket of what a relationship is on the one hand, and a free-for-all on the other. And that might mean having a more intelligent recognition of how people in other parts of the world come together and marry. Hey, we're now on 2 minutes over time, so thank you very much, James. Thank you, everyone,
one last
for watching.
thing, David.
All right, he's got more to say. Yep.
I do. I forgot to mention that we have a petition going and on our website. And if you go to my Facebook page, and I think the link will be put in the comments as well, we've got a petition to expand the eligibility criteria in various ways for this resident visa. So please have a look and sign that if you agree. Yeah,
that's a really good point. That Facebook page and also on the ACT website, you can find that petition under campaigns. Please share it widely, because our job is to represent people. We know how many people are suffering an enormous amount of pain as a result of the government's policies. But what we need to do is unite people in opposition to it so we can get real change for people who've been inconvenienced and often hurt by the government's policies. So please share that. Thank you very much for watching, and we hope that everybody has a really great Saturday afternoon, and we'll catch you again soon on ACT TV.